Docking scores. Oh boy. This has to be one of the most misused calculations in all of computational chemistry, especially for those new to the field, so I'll cut you a little bit of slack. But I've been seeing a lot of LinkedIn posts and a lot of other conversation, and I've experienced a lot of questions in my career and throughout my education about what exactly are docking scores. Can we use them in drug discovery to rank compounds? Are they a surrogate for binding affinity? All these types of questions we're going to get into. What is a docking score? How are they calculated? Are they useful? Are they not useful? What are some things to avoid? Some warnings that I have for you. And I hope that this is helpful for you in your discovery of computational chemistry. Let's go. What's up, folks? I'm Dr. Avery. I've been a computational chemist for a really long time now. I have a PhD in physical chemistry from UCLA, and as I mentioned in the intro to this video, we're going to be talking about docking scores today. But a molecular docking calculation is actually two steps. The first step is pose generation. Now we need to take a ligand of interest and associate it to the protein active site. That would be for generating binding mode hypotheses in the absence of a crystal structure, for example. Now we need a place to start for structure-based drug discovery, and pose generation is how we get there. That's when the docking score comes in. The docking score is just a number, really, that's generated by an algorithm or a set of equations. That's really all it is, fundamentally. Depending on the software that you use, the algorithm can be based on shape complementarity. It can give you a score based on your protein ligand shape complementarity, for example. There can be a list of physics-based approximations and terms that go into calculating your docking score. There can even be some fit to regression models and other historic biological data as well that can inform some of the algorithms that are out there for calculating docking scores. Now we have to know that a docking score, they're relative calculations, not absolute. They're certainly not binding free energies, and they're not comparable across different protein targets. So this is very important. Whenever you're screening, you have to screen against the same protein target for, I would say, even comparably sized ligands, as this method doesn't score for entropy. So your docking scores don't scale very well with size. Now we need to remember also that there's really no rigorous thermodynamic interpretation for these numbers. The docking score at its core is really just a measure, a quantitative measure, but still an idea of how happy your software thinks the ligand is in a particular pose in a particular protein target. That's really the extent of what a docking score is at its fundamental core. So we have our binding pose. Now, how are the docking scores calculated? I mentioned earlier that it comes from an algorithm or equations. I'll put some up here so that you can see an example of them. Basically, they're terms that are stitched together to account for van der Waals terms, Coulombic interactions, hydrogen bonding, things like chemical properties. There's some that include empirical factors that are tuned on particular data sets. There's some penalties for bad poses or clashes, incorrect charge states, etc. Basically, your scoring function will analyze each of your poses. It will run through this algorithm or this equation, and it will generate a score. Now you'll get something, for example, negative 8.5 kcal per mole. Now the units typically are either unitless or they'll be in kcal per mole, which I think is particularly dishonest. We know that they're not in any way, shape, or form reliably tied to binding energies in any way. So calling them kcal per mole, I think, tends to lead people astray from the true use of these docking scores. If you have a different opinion or you have some knowledge that I don't have, feel free to drop it in the comments and let me know. I'd love to change my mind if you have a compelling argument for giving them kcal per mole units. but for now I'm just going to refer to them as unitless scores. The more negative the score, the better, though. So in that case, in that sense, rather, they are akin to binding energies. So you want to typically screen for lower docking scores, but that, again, warning, it will not necessarily translate to better activity. But if you have, let's say, a Gaussian distribution of docking scores calculated from thousands or millions of compounds as a source of triaging your virtual screening campaign, then you can set for yourself a certain cutoff and say, these are most likely not going to work. Will you lose some true positives in there? Maybe. Will you cut out a lot of false positives? Almost assuredly. So in that case, having a cutoff for docking score that's too high is an effective use of docking scores. So we've seen already one case in which docking scores can be useful. We can see that in a large-scale virtual screening experiment, there are certain cutoffs or certain measurements that you can exclude when you're going through this kind of drug discovery filter, starting with billions of compounds and essentially ending in a small set of compounds that can be tested biologically. This is a well-known drug discovery paradigm basically for pre-filtering. Taking docking scores that are very high and cutting them out is generally a good principle. Now, are docking scores useful for other things? I would say hold on for a second while I talk about pose generation again, the first part of a molecular docking calculation. So what I prefer to do in my campaigns, I prefer to generate poses with docking if there is no template or no query structure, for example, no protein ligand co-crystal to base my hypotheses on, then I will generate poses with molecular docking. I enjoy doing this, I do it a lot, but from there, I don't score with docking scores. I go on to molecular dynamics simulations and I will score with, again, physics-based heuristics, but in a more dynamic picture, taking a more statistical approach. That's my preferred way. So docking scores after the initial triage of taking out the compounds or the poses that have exceedingly high docking scores, I don't typically use them for much else other than that. Now, if you have some success stories or caveats for using docking scores, please drop them below. Again, I'd love to learn with you guys. I'm just telling you straight up that for me, in my experience, taking the docked pose and running molecular dynamics simulations or some sort of post-docking analysis has been a lot more successful at generating true hits and screening out false positives than just using docking score alone. I look at social media and even throughout published papers, too many people put blind faith in these numbers without doing the simplest sanity check, that is, visualizing the poses to make sure they make sense. I was helping a researcher one time with his virtual screening exercise, and he comes to me with a beautifully curated, ranked list of top hits and said, Avery, what do you think of these? And I looked at them and I immediately saw the problem. They were strained, misaligned, they didn't make chemical sense. There were polar groups sticking into the pocket. There were non-polar groups sticking out into the what would be the solvent. I said, these are terrible. I looked at him in the eyes, and these are awful structures, you know. And he looked at me with these big, wide, soft, impressionable eyes and said, why are they bad? And in my mind, I was thinking, well, you're the computational chemist, so you tell me why they're bad, you know. And I realized the problem here is that if you're going to do computational chemistry, this goes for new computational chemists, this goes for experimental chemists who are playing around. If you want to do computational chemistry, you need to understand the theory, the physics, the approximations of the tools that you're using. You know, I wouldn't bust into the lab with some random beakers and distillation columns and random chemicals and just throw them together and hope for the best. The same thing is, I think that people approach computational tools with not the same level of reverence, and I think that's a mistake, really. I think that's doing the industry a disservice. You really, in order to leverage these tools properly, you need to visualize your compounds, you need to understand the use cases and the limitations for these tools. Then you can properly apply them in their context and for great success. And I do wish you all great success in application of your computational chemistry tools. If you found this video helpful, I sure hope you would subscribe, like the video so that others can see it also in their feed. Maybe we can help everyone to understand computational chemistry a little bit more. Thanks.